Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Civic University Network Conference session on the art of place, the civic role of universities and the cultural sector beyond the pandemic. My name's Jane Robinson and I'm Pro Vice Chancellor of Engagement and Place at Newcastle University, and I'll be the host for this session. So on Monday, we saw the move to the next stage of the roadmap for easing COVID-19 restrictions, which meant that for many cultural organisations, they were finally able to reopen their doors. And for university students, they were allowed to return to campus for face-to-face teaching, albeit that for most, teaching has now ended for the year. So I guess it feels as though we're still easing towards some kind of normal, although we recognise that there are still ongoing variants of concern in terms of the pandemic. I think for many of us, we've been asking the question of what that return to normal might look like, and asking whether we should be thinking about what could be different. So rather than just thinking about we build back better, how do we build forward fairer? And what role can universities and the cultural sector working together contribute to that? The relationship between universities and the cultural sector is well established, but in the past year, it's become even more important, I think, with arts organisations, museums and libraries playing a key role in supporting communities, bringing people together and creating thought-provoking work, inspiring reflection in some of the most difficult circumstances. It's been a tough year for everyone, but I guess the cultural sector and freelancers in particular have been hugely impacted. The Civic University Network has been exploring the challenges faced by the sector and how we work together, both to support a vibrant and growing cultural sector, which is so important to our country, but also playing our part in supporting wider economic and social review. I'm delighted today to be joined by an expert panel who will be sharing their experiences and reflections and responding to your questions. I'll be introducing them all in a moment, but before we get started, one or two housekeeping messages. Just to make you aware that this session will be recorded and will be made available to the conference via the network members area. You can use the chat function throughout the session for general comments and discussion, if you make sure that you address that to all panelists and attendees. If you have a specific question to be put to the panel, and I do hope we get some good discussion going, please do use the Q&A function on your toolbar. Don't put the questions in the chat, we might not be able to pick those up. And finally, for optimal viewing, please select the hide non-video participants. The instructions are in the chat function. So without further ado, I'll introduce our speakers. I'm really pleased that we're being joined by Councillor Hugh Thomas, who is the leader of Cardiff Council. And I know he's literally just arrived from a COVID-19 briefing, so he's, I know, covering lots of different bases. Hugh is also the Welsh Local Government Association spokesperson for culture, tourism and major events. And he's also the Core Cities UK Cabinet member with responsibility for culture. He's worked in a number of different industries, including IT and transport and international development, and of course is a fluent Welsh speaker. So Hugh, welcome. Can I hand over to you for your reflections first of all?
Thanks, Jane. Bore da pawb, and good to see you from sunny Cardiff at the moment. Really happy to be here and maybe talk a little bit about the work of the Cultural Cities Inquiry and the part that culture should play in the levelling up agenda in the UK, and particularly the role of UK universities supporting local authorities on that agenda. So for those of you who don't know, the Cultural Cities Inquiry was a piece of work commissioned jointly really by Arts Council England and Core Cities, which is an association of the 10 largest cities in the UK, commissioned back in 2019 and chaired by Dame Jane Ann Gardia, who at the time was chief exec of Virgin Money. And really what we were trying to do is not so much make the case for culture, because I think that's fairly well recognised and fairly well accepted, rather to make the case for how it could be funded differently and better. Building on the fact that we see culture as a powerful force for good throughout the UK, but with a particular focus, and for when we were speaking to government on driving, using the power of culture to reignite and drive economic growth with the ultimate aim of improving lives. Soon after the pandemic began, we reconvened that group last year to revisit the work in the context of the challenges that the cultural sector, as well as cities and towns, were now facing, and identified a series of challenges in the light of the pandemic, as well as then opportunities where culture could play a key role in supporting the social and economic recovery of places. And the main areas of work then focused on cultural leadership, investment, talent development, and creating place. So the strategy really is to optimize the value of cultural activity to fully realize its benefits within places. And I think as cities, certainly in Cardiff, we see the art of placemaking very much as an opportunity to take the work of that cultural inquiry forward. I think we've all learned in the last 14 months how important community is to place, and how important culture is to community. And there's been much said and much written about the future role of cities and the so-called death of the city. I personally think that's exaggerated, but there is some emerging evidence of people moving out of cities and wanting bigger houses, bigger gardens, and able to live in the countryside where they can work from home. And I think one of the best defences that cities have for their continued growth and sustainability is that sense of place and culture that cities still have the critical mass to generate. So for me, I see the creative industries and culture as being an even more important component of what makes a city an attractive place to live in the coming few years than it ever has been. In terms of, and I'll keep my remarks brief. In terms of higher education, in Cardiff, we're really fortunate. We're a home to 3 universities, 70,000 students, about 10% of whom study creative subjects. And we work closely and effectively with all, particularly, I guess, in supporting and developing the creative sector and the creative industries within the city. So, for example, at present, the council here in Cardiff is an active partner in Clustur, which is a 10 million AHRC funded project led by the 3 universities, investing in R&D in the screen sector in Cardiff. Likewise, we work closely with University of South Wales and the Royal Welsh College of Music and Drama to deliver the council's Cardiff music strategy, which was developed by a global leader in the music city movement, Sound Diplomacy. We've got a Cardiff Music Board, and my team then in the council work on delivering one of the most comprehensive music strategies in the UK, not just around supporting live music, but actually about building from the schools up an interest and an engagement with music, seeing it as a critical part in Cardiff's cultural offer and in Cardiff's cultural regeneration. So I hope that paints a very quick picture. I'm looking forward to hearing what everyone has to say, particularly in my capacity as the Core Cities portfolio holder, and looking forward to exploring how we can best position culture to be at the forefront of the levelling up agenda into UK government as well. I'll pause there, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think some really important insights there in terms of the role of the cultural inquiry. But I think also this question around the future of cities and how important culture and creative industries are and will be in terms of thinking about the future of cities. And in some ways, I think that's links very well to our next speaker, who is Vanessa Tillman, who is Director of City and Cultural Engagement Partnerships in Sheffield University. She's a writer and a former archaeologist and also a visiting lecturer at Yale University. Vanessa, can I ask you just to reflect a little bit on the experiences within Sheffield as a city?
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to this. I just want to give a very quick summary of when one understands the role of universities in place. We mustn't apply a one-shop model that fits all, because each university operates in a different ecological, cultural sector. So my university, Sheffield, is traditionally seen as a high advanced engineering, science-led university. And we have a strong arts faculty, but we don't have the practice-led subjects that other universities may have, especially we've got great colleagues in the city of Hallam University who do that. So what I've approached is that we have to have an integrated relationship with the creative cultural ecology from bottom up to top down. And in some ways, the university is sometimes the broker, sometimes the gel that fits it together, and sometimes the kind of critique friend on the outside, actually saying, can we all sit together and think about place? And that approach internally is also seen in the university as a department that crosses across the university. So my department, which I'm co-director with my colleague Sarah Want, is very much about working partnerships across Sheffield City region and the city of Sheffield. And that's integrated into the university's pillar of city vibrancy. And I know it sounds a bit like I'm being very practical here, but one of the issues that you can have 400 or 500 projects that a university is doing in the city, but if there's no integrated strategy, the impact can be quite short term, can be based on the research project that an academic is working with the building project that a university is doing. So really have an integrated 5-year or 10-year pipeline of projects that you work together is what we've now started doing. And I think the very first example we looked at for the last 12 months, 14 months, we put the resources of our university, landscape specialists in education and architects through my team to work directly on helping Sheffield put a future high street bid in, which was successful. And that integrated approach is really important across the university, that we have art students who work with engineers and we have engineers who work with creative partners. So in an average year, we will work across 100 different partnerships in the city, from an individual artist all the way up to the local council or local authority or the directors of the place agenda to put a bid in together. And that's taken us 5 years to get to that point, and we're rolling out our new campaign called Made Together. So it's not just about one personal relationship with the VC and the chief executive, which sometimes is the model that people seem to think should happen. That has got to be there, but there has to be delivery platforms across the university to enable people in the city and the council and the local authorities to actually find the perfect partnership in the university, because big university structures can be as complex as anyone inside to find out about. Similar to, you know, Newcastle University with your role, Jane, I think having that integrated role across the university is really essential for place. And I think understanding how we can work with national organisations to leverage that support. Sheffield is one of the most underfunded in the kind of creative arts sector of the core cities. And we have invested in, or both universities invested in the Cultural Compact, which is one of the recommendations. But that top level approach also has to be in line with the creative ecology, 21,000 practitioners in the city who are in the creative industries, small businesses, SMEs, integrated work plans, and understanding that the creative ecology is not just big institutions that could dominate your city are very important, but you have to look after the freelancers and the artists and the small organisations as well.
Thanks, Vanessa. I think really interesting to get that perspective of how there's no one size fits all. I think that's the reality of a place agenda. It's understanding the place, and as you say, the wider ecology, and I think also a sort of a very strong sense that although we're now looking at our kind of response to the pandemic, actually a lot of these relationships are about having long-term strategic plans, and I think working, as you say, really sort of thinking across disciplines and different partnerships to sort of embed our ability to really deliver across the institution, working with partners. So thank you very much for your reflections there. I think if we can turn now to Kate Denby. Kate is Executive Director of Northern Stage in Newcastle. She's been in that role since 2015, and obviously as someone who's been leading a large cultural venue, has had that experience of managing over the last 14 months or so in COVID. And Kate, I wonder if you can give us your perspective as a cultural venue, and how the last year or so has been.
Thanks, Jane. I'm going to talk a little bit about, I suppose, some of the looking a bit further back, actually, with our relationship with the university over a slightly longer period. I think there's been an acute experience over the last 12 months, but I think that how we emerge out of this is going to be as a direct result of some of the kind of strength of partnerships that we've been able to build with Newcastle University, for example, over the last 5 years or so. So Northern Stage is the largest producing theatre in the Northeast, and we're based on the campus here at Newcastle University. And for us, our artistic mission is interwoven with our social mission to help understand the world around us, be a place and space within our community where we can imagine and realise our futures. And this is a civic purpose that we share with Newcastle University. And over the last 5 or 6 years, we've shifted the focus of our partnership to that shared civic purpose, looking at what we can each bring to the table to contribute to address the needs of our city and of our society. We've taken the time over the last 5 years to understand and to learn how to accommodate our different contexts, the practical outputs we need to demonstrate success in our respective fields. And this approach has led to new and more impactful collaborations, and I'm absolutely certain has given us the foundations to find the new innovation that we're going to need as we come out of this last sort of 15 months, and reassess, regather, and start to relook at those impacts, the collective impacts that we want to have on our city and region. So some of the things that we've done in the past, for example, is we've got a shared interest in social justice, and Northern Stage runs Young Company, which uses co-creation methodology to make work with young people, particularly those experiencing disadvantage. Newcastle University were an early partner to this project, offering expertise to evaluate the impact of this methodology on young people's lives. And as a result of that collaboration, we're now a delivery partner within a European funded project led by the Dean of Social Justice, researching young migrants' engagement with culture. We're also collaborating on sector-wide, cross-city collaborative projects. So City of Dreams is a 10-year strategy developed by Newcastle Gateshead Cultural Venues. And it's a strategy to engage every young person in Newcastle and Gateshead in cultural activity to help make this city the best place to be young. So Newcastle Gateshead Cultural Venues is a partnership with the 10 largest cultural venues across our city region. And City of Dreams as an initiative now has partners from across the community, voluntary and youth sectors, local government, health services, and from the business community. And Newcastle University have been a major partner in this venture, really from its earliest inception, offering the breadth of expertise of the university in quite a needs-led approach. And City of Dreams is an incredibly ambitious endeavour, and it has the potential to influence national policy and agendas. But it's about more than access to culture. It's about skills and leadership. It's about building and retaining talent in our region. It's about enabling young people to have their voices heard and to enable them to help influence their communities, and ensuring our young people have access to the social and cultural capital that they're going to need to be able to imagine and realize their own futures. And if that wasn't needed, you know, but that wasn't needed before, it's certainly needed now as we sort of the impact, that the disproportionate impact that this last year has had on our young people. And so I think for us, we found that our partnership has not been a straight line process. It was once described to me as an effort in pointillism. And as Vanessa articulated so well, it really needs to have an integrated approach with resources of time and people committed to be able to demonstrate it's important, and to enable organisations, particularly smaller organisations that don't have access to perhaps the same strategic and policy agendas, to be able to contribute the very real and very important grassroots understanding and knowledge of communities through a network, through a structure that can influence at the most senior levels, and enable that excellent practice to become more universal. And so I think really just by working generously, by working responsively, by valuing the collective experience in the room, we can achieve all of those goals much more quickly with much greater impact.
Thank you, Kate. That's really good to hear about that example. And I think, as you say, one of the things that I think has really come through over the last year has been that sense that the strength of the existing partnerships has enabled us to really kind of think about how we can work together and think about what the impact of the pandemic will mean going forward, particularly, as you say, recognising the fact that existing inequalities have been exacerbated. And I think also your point about really thinking about shared purpose, a shared agenda, artistically and socially, between Northern Stage and the university, and how we can have that kind of focus on the difference that we can make working together with a wider partnership in place, I think is very powerful, and it really can make a huge difference, as you describe. Can I now turn to Darren Henley? Darren is Chief Executive of the Arts Council, and led Classic FM for 15 years, but before this. Darren, I hope you don't mind me plugging your latest book, The Arts Dividend Revisited, Why Invest in Culture, because it does feel that it is important in terms of that the role that public investment is in the arts can play in terms of the sort of wider well-being, particularly as we think about the impact of the pandemic and how we build forward fairer. Can I hand over to you for as the last panelist for your reflections?
Good morning, and thank you for that introduction, Jane. I don't think any author, there's probably many authors in the room, ever mind anybody plugging their book. There it is, just in case you're wondering what color. It's bright yellow, so you can see it, but saves me having to plug it, so I can look like I haven't got an ego. It's great to see you this morning. I hope everybody, first of all, just to say, is doing well and looking after themselves. I'm speaking to you from Canterbury this morning, home of 3 excellent universities, and I should start by saying I'm unashamedly a big fan of what universities do on so many levels, and I'm always very happy to come and talk about the value that universities play in our towns and cities across this country, because I think it needs to be said and shouted very loudly. I think one of the things, it's been a very tough year for absolutely everybody, and huge challenges for people on personal levels and on institutional and organisational levels, huge impact on people who work across the creative industries as freelancers and on our cultural organisations, and I want to acknowledge that at the start of these comments, because it's been very tough for everyone. But hopefully we're in a position where we're starting to think about what the world might be like and what England might be like and the UK might be like as we hopefully pull out of the effects of the pandemic. And I think, the question for a lot of people is what we can do to pull together to create the strongest and fastest and most positive recovery from COVID. And, that's about rebuilding our economy, re-energizing our dormant industries, and very importantly, healing some of the damage as well to individuals. And I believe universities and higher education and further education institutions are absolutely at the heart of this on a local basis, on a national basis, and also internationally as well. I think when you look at universities and you look at the roles that they play in cities, they have an enormous impact on their local economies. But more than that, they're very, very powerful at defining the nature of their places. And I think, that's very, very important. They share the name of the place on their headed note paper. They are often the biggest employer, but they absolutely, alongside local authorities, are great partners in defining the nature of a place. And I think Vanessa's absolutely right. It's not one size fits all. The importance of great civic universities is they know their place and they are reflective of it. And they're very confident about that narrative and that story that they can tell. I think that we obviously are very focused at the Arts Council on attracting creative talent and growing the talent pipeline of the future. But a lot of what we do, why do we get up in the morning at the Arts Council? I would say that's because what we do is we invest taxpayers and national lottery players' money in creating happier lives for people in towns and cities and villages up and down the country. And as partners, universities and higher education, further education institutions are absolutely central to that. And I think there's a reason why we want to do that. We want to do it for the people in the places, and we want to do it because it's part of building that national infrastructure, but also because it has a global impact as well. And, I think universities do an amazing job at promoting the reputation of their towns and their cities, which they call home, on a global stage. And actually, it's often because of the work they're doing in the cultural sector that they're able to tell that story. And I think, we've got to move away from binary decisions where it's all about science and tech or all about arts and culture. It's meshing those two things together. You could have institutions which are very, very strong in engineering and tech and business, equally strong in developing the performing arts and the humanities. And both of those alongside each other are equally as valuable. It plays into all of the arguments we can do around the national economy, the work that our universities do in research, in skills, in developing ideas, in imagining the future, in innovation, and feeding into sectors that we have pre-pandemic seen as being incredibly fast growing for the UK economy, things like the creative industries, which we should be very proud of. And hopefully, with the investment that the government's made in the Cultural Recovery Fund of getting on for £1.8 billion across the UK, we've got creative industries that are ready to go again when we move out of the pandemic. And I think that universities also have a really important role to play in levelling up. In many of the places where we work, the key partners we work with across the country are local authorities and universities. They are some of the biggest creators of value and jobs and skills within a place. They're sustaining and creating and nurturing forward-thinking creative companies across all sorts of sectors in our world, in the creative industries, and also in all of the other science and tech and medical worlds as well. And I think that's something that's absolutely important, the role that universities have in building that next generation of talent and that next generation of profitable business talent as well. And I think where our cultural organisations, and hearing from Kate just now as well, and also from Hugh with what he said around the importance of what we learned from the Cultural Cities Inquiry, is that when we can bring cultural organisations and higher education, further education institutions together, we can really amplify the impact. There's a shared set of goals, there's a real commonality, and when they come together, one can really help the other. And I think that's where we see the most positive work going. One of the things, finally, just my final point, is that we must do, which is really, really important. We have an opportunity right now for a bit of a reset because of what we've seen. We've been painfully aware of what we haven't had in terms of access to libraries and museums and arts organisations and working with our artists in our towns and villages and cities across the country over the last 14 months. But we've got an opportunity to build back now. And I think the one thing that we're very keen to do is to make sure we challenge ourselves. We don't just build back to where we were before. We want to have a more inclusive cultural sector. We want to have audiences and a workforce that is more representative of the way that England and the UK as a whole looks and feels in the 21st century. So, you know, we're very, very keen to make sure that Black and Asian and ethnically diverse colleagues are represented in our audiences and in our workforce, and also disabled and deaf and neurodivergent colleagues are at the table as well. And that's really, really important. It's an opportunity for all of us to think about that. And I think we should challenge ourselves very strongly on that. This is a moment where in a year, 2 or 3 years' time, we can say we actually did something that made a difference to make our sector fairer and more inclusive. And I think universities and the work they've done with widening their outreach have been a very powerful part of that story. We now need to make sure it becomes even more of a reality.
Thank you very much, Darren. I think some really sort of strong themes coming through there around the importance of partnership and the way in which by working together we can amplify our impact and our work on shared goals. We've got a number of questions coming through from our audience on the Q&A. So I think if we can perhaps come together as a panel now. I do think that theme of inclusivity and fairness comes through and is also reflected in the government's priority of levelling up. And we have got a question that's come through around a kind of how we make sure that the work that we do doesn't just benefit cities, but the rest of the country as well, and some of those smaller towns, coastal areas, and so on. So I'd be interested in the panel's reflection on how when we think about levelling up, we think about those opportunities that will benefit people across the country. Can I perhaps, I don't know, Darren, do you want to start off with that one?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think there are some very good examples of universities who are city-based universities who are reaching out beyond their places, and they're seeing responsibility for a whole region. One that comes to mind is, you know, it's always bad on these calls when you use one example because everyone else hates you instantly because they think my example is better than yours. But the one that comes to mind is, I know Nottingham-Trent University doing a lot of work in Mansfield, for example, and thinking about what they will do there. And I think what's interesting is there's two things. It very much ties with what we're doing in the Arts Council's 10-year strategy, Let's Create. What we're saying is we want people to have high quality arts and culture activity where they live, that they can participate in, and it's really important that they get to make and create themselves. But also we want to bring to them the best of the professional work that's available around the world, and that duality. And I see that a little bit with universities as well in their own way, where they're working to say, actually, we're a university where we're going to give a route in for people who live and were born in this area and can come in. And that's really important because we may well be the only route they have into higher education because they're comfortable with us, they're used to working with us. And also we're going to be a world-class institution that gathers, you know, other students, other researchers from all around the world and brings them into that place. And you have that duality. And I think when you get that right, that's actually a really exciting plan for the future.
Vanessa.
I think the response that I would have is that sometimes when you are called the University of the City, University of Sheffield or University of Newcastle, people think that you don't work beyond your city, but often you do. So, but you have to respond to what those towns or communities want. So we have the obvious joy of the Sheffield City region, or South Yorkshire now as it's going to be called. And what's really important about that gives us a mechanism and a landing platform to work with Barnsley, Rotherham and Doncaster in ways that we would normally have not worked historically. But we also respond to their needs. So Barnsley has an amazing heritage strategy, really incredible heritage strategy. And that's where they've asked us to support them on, to have access to our experts across the university, but history and archaeology. So I think the point I've got to make as well is, don't just go in and say, we're going to do this to a community. Don't just go in and say, we're going to help you in your town or city. Find out what that city and town needs. And even if the government says it's a priority, if that town doesn't have that strength of place in that area, don't impose it because the government says you should. Or even the Arts Council, no offence, Darren. But certain areas need to come from within. And it's, to me, I really must emphasize that ecology of place is not just about local authorities and universities. It's communities, citizens, and the thousands of artists and freelancers and small organisations who actually have been left out in the last year in this pandemic. Our research has shown that they are the missing middle. They are the ones who've not had the funding from the Create Culture Recovery Fund or from the government. So that, to me, I'm very passionate about that, because I feel that we've got to help integrate that into the place agenda.
Thanks, Vanessa. I think points very well made, and I can see other colleagues sort of that point about really understanding the community. And I should say, Darren, you're worried about picking up examples, but I'm pleased to say there's quite a lot in the chat where people are sharing examples of where they've been involved, and obviously on the conference website there are opportunities for people to share experiences and best practice. So hopefully we'll build that. I'm interested, I think, Hugh, to bring in your perspective, obviously as a leader of a city and involved in core cities, but thinking about this perhaps more widely across Wales in terms of the local government perspective. Is that something that you get that sense of, you know, how we make sure that we engage communities sort of right the way across the country in cultural participation and the way in which universities can work to help support that?
Yeah, certainly, and actually, I grew up in a seaside town, so I've seen both sides of it. Although a seaside town with its own university, which is fairly unique. I think this question is a really fair one, and it's one of the ones that cities and core cities we certainly grapple with, because I think it's very often positioned that cities are against towns, and actually all the research that we've seen, and core cities has commissioned some work last year actually by OECD, which reinforces again, cities and town work best when they complement each other, and actually the magic is in the proximity and the links between towns and cities. Certainly, in Cardiff, it is something that I see played out. We have a city deal arrangement in the Cardiff capital region, and they say jokingly, but they mean it. Leaders in some of the South Wales Valleys authorities saying everything goes to Cardiff, and I say, well, actually, no, everything doesn't go to Cardiff. It is spread out, and I think maybe what's also not acknowledged in this conversation is the huge amounts of deprivation that do exist within cities. I think it's very easy for the casual observer to see gleaming buildings in city centres, wealthy suburbs, and think the city is doing okay. Specifically in Cardiff's case, the southern arc of the city, which is a population of about 60,000, if that was a standalone local authority, that would be the most deprived local authority in Wales. So I think it's really important to acknowledge that there is a huge amount of inequality that exists within cities as well. Probably greater than does exist more visibly in some of those in some towns. So for me, the levelling up agenda is about, particularly on infrastructure, not so much cultural infrastructure per se, but around physical infrastructure to better connect city regions with a hinterland, to make sure that everybody can take advantage of the opportunities that exist in different parts of the city region. And I do also think there probably is now an emerging opportunity with working from home and the hybrid model of working, which I think will emerge, where people maybe do have to commute into a place of work in a city centre 3 days a week, but then will spend the remainder of their time at home, potentially some distance from the city in a town or village, and will then be contributing more economically to their home location, and that in turn then creates the opportunity for businesses and culture to then flourish more in those towns as well. So I think for me, the levelling up agenda is about creating those links to enable that kind of hybrid model to work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a sort of clear sort of sense that you know, these sort of binary arguments are unhelpful, sort of cities versus town, the idea of kind of putting, I think Darren, you were talking about the kind of binary view of science subjects versus art subjects. And I think there's a very strong sense from the panel's contributions and from the questions that we need to be thinking more inclusively. I think Hugh, just picking up on a point you made around kind of levelling up, it's both levelling up within places as well as across the whole country. And I'm very aware, Kate, that within Newcastle we've got real sort of variations across the city, and we have got you know, just in terms of life expectancy on our metro, we've sort of famously looked at kind of a couple of stops could give you 10 years difference in your life expectancy. And I know that's something that Northern Stage have done quite a lot of work thinking about how we address some of those issues around social justice in the city. And then if you want to just sort of share some reflections on that.
Sure, I think there's definitely something about how we think much more actively about where do we have expertise and where do we not have expertise. And the expertise of communities is absolutely located in those communities. So thinking about how do we completely change our approach to listen to that need and not assume and try and fill in the blanks before based on our own knowledge and understanding. So, for example, at Northern Stage for the last 5 years, we've been making a really strong investment in one particular area of the city, Biker, which sort of is definitely on the sort of 10 years lower on that life expectancy journeys. You know, has a number of issues, but to actually, rather than going in and being presumptive about our understanding of what those issues are, actually how do we go in and listen to and work with communities and enable a co-creation methodology that allows us to respond to need. And I think having a completely shifting your approach about then recognizing what is your expertise and then being able to shift those conversations, particularly with collaborations with the university, and it's enabled a much more in terms of levelling up, it's enabled a much more parity of expertise when you come into spaces, because being able to acknowledge what do we know, where can we add value, and where do we not know, let's be humble and acknowledge where others have greater expertise than us, has enabled a much greater impact in terms of the quality of conversation and the rapidity of the impact that you can have. So I think that's definitely an area for us to, it's acknowledging our privilege. Where do we have privilege of knowledge and experience, and when do we just need to sort of get out of the way a little bit? But I think that's more listening to communities and responding. And then that's where, going back to that final question, or the previous question around the role that cities can play, is that they can be a nexus, they can be a hub to enable exchange and learning that can then be informed and allow those practitioners and allow those communities to take learning and embed it in their own communities. So I think setting up the structures to create more listening, more listening to need of communities is, I think, the way that we need to move forward.
Thank you, and I think that really enforces some of the points that Vanessa was making around actually this is about us understanding need and distinctiveness of places and communities and responding to that as partners, and thinking about how as universities and the cultural sector we can come together. There's been some quite interesting questions around the sense of how we can work. I think, Vanessa, you talked about the creative ecology, and that sense that also as a result of the pandemic, freelancers and individual practitioners have been particularly impacted. I just wonder if we can kind of reflect on how as universities and the cultural sector, we can come together to think about that whole cultural ecology and how we can support that. Darren, I imagine this is something that the Arts Council has been giving quite a lot of thought to.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it goes to Vanessa's well-made point around co-curation at the start as well. And it's not about, you know, someone from big institutions, sometimes far away from a place, telling people what they ought to have. It's about actually creating something that's just very relevant to that place, created by and with and for the people who live and work and study there. I mean, you know, I think we're very acutely aware of the challenges that individual freelancers have faced over the last year. You know, at the Arts Council, from the funding that we have, we've actually invested getting on for £60 million in around getting on for 15 to 16,000 individual freelancers over the last year. So we know that's not enough to change everybody's life, but we're absolutely aware of that. And I think one of the things that we have in terms of an infrastructure that's there, and universities are very key in this because many of them are homes to our national portfolio organisations, many of them work in partnership, is we've got those organisations, and what we need to do you know, right now as we start to see those reopening is to ensure that they are investing in work that is giving people jobs, you know, and so that's a really important part of that opening up again, is that actually creative practitioners, those freelancers who haven't had the opportunity over the last 14 months are out there being commissioned to do new work and to create things and to get those back into work into our sector as soon as we possibly can, and that's a really, really important thing.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true, and certainly in Newcastle, we work with a number of cultural partners, and I think one of the kind of underpinning themes around the cultural compact that's being developed in Newcastle is how we can make sure that is very inclusive in thinking about a whole range of cultural practitioners, as well as working with our partners in health and local government and so on. And I think mechanisms like the cultural compacts can provide a useful platform for thinking about that sort of, you know, what the future could look like in terms of a more inclusive and sustainable future. Vanessa, did you want to come in on that point?
I also wanted to look at the kind of wider aspects, because one of the things that universities can play a role in, and all aspects of university, is data. And we're very good at looking at data and creating data. And let's be honest, the creative industries are not that great at it. we're not that good at getting the real nitty gritty. If you look at some of the NEST works on your region, the NEST reports will have a very different perception to what your region, you know about your region's creative ecology, because most of the time the organisations don't have the time to answer the survey, to get back to the survey. You know, they understand the real importance of capturing that data. So the real-time project that's had a real impact for COVID for us in Sheffield City region is we have a UKRI award, which looks very closely at the impact on each individual organisation. So 50 organisations, 500 audiences, 100 freelancers. That doesn't sound a lot, but real quantitative data then lands and makes those decisions. And we know in terms of the levelling up, what areas have really been affected. And obviously the Cultural Recovery Fund has been great, but only 65% success. So what's happened to that 35%? And it's actually landed, sorry again, Darren, the Cultural Recovery funding is landed in areas that have already had a lot of Arts Council funding before. So if you were a low income area for the Arts Council, you've been doubly penalised because you haven't got, our research has showed that and has other research projects. So that also then gives the government real data to show the levelling up is not just about people saying we haven't got the money, here's the evidence. And I think evidence, universities as research data places across the sector, we're really good at that, and local authorities have been cut in that area dramatically by the last 15 years. So I think that's a really good role that people can play as kind of like, and we are got very strict codes of ethics and how that can be used, and it's not going to be sold to Google. So I think we are honest citizens in that place.
Thanks, Vanessa. I think that point about evidence and how we make the case and the utilisation of data, I think, is really important. In Newcastle, we have the National Innovation Centre for Data, and we've been looking at how we can actually connect that with our partnerships in the cultural sector, think differently about how we use data more effectively. I just want to kind of pick up a sort of question really about how together the cultural sector and universities can I suppose, building on your point, Vanessa, and some of the questions, provide that evidence and that case to government about the importance of the arts and arts subjects and education. Darren, we were involved in the Durham Commission on the importance of creativity in education, and I think for many people the recent announcements from government and a kind of mood music which seems to prioritise science ahead of arts and creativity in educational terms is something of concern. Can I just ask the panel's reflections on how we might try and redress those points? Perhaps Hugh, can I come to you first in terms of the kind of the cultural cities inquiry and that sort of sense of how we actually sort of make sure we're maintaining that reflection of the importance of culture and creativity?
I mean, I think first and foremost, you start from the value we create to UK PLC, because I think that will always be a primary concern to government and to Treasury. From my perspective, when you look at it's what, over £100 billion now that the contribution of the UK creative sector to the UK economy, and yet I can remember when I was in university, and I studied music, by the way, there were people denigrating media studies even then as being a waste of time, whereas actually that kind of creative course has shown its value. So I think that's probably the building block. I would, from my personal perspective, stress the importance in terms of building up a coalition around the arts and culture. I would stress the need to continue the fight to broaden its appeal and broaden its inclusion. And I think specifically within the context of universities and local authorities, I think both those types of institutions have got a really important role to play. Neither of them have got a spotless track record, but I'm particularly struck with councils, through our schools, through our youth services, through our social services, we have got links into hard to reach communities, which I think other organisations struggle with. So I think for me there is huge synergy in the closer linking up of universities and cultural organisations with councils, because councils can connect those organisations to those hard to reach communities. And I would point people towards, for example, the project we have in Cardiff called the Cardiff Commitment, where we have universities and over 200 businesses signed up to providing work experience opportunities, placements, and indeed apprenticeships and job opportunities, which is then channeled through the council towards schools in those hard to reach areas. Not just in the creative sector, in all industries, but trying to make up the deficit of opportunity that exists in those places. That's a bit waffling, Jane, but just some last minute reflections, I guess.
Thank you, Hugh. And I think very apposite in terms of, actually what the Civic University Network is about is absolutely about how we can bring together universities and our partners in the cultural sector, in local government, in health, with business and so on, to have that sort of shared mission that Kate was describing about, by working together we can have a greater impact. We're coming towards the close of the session. I'm conscious there are lots of questions and chat, which is fantastic. I'm sorry we haven't been able to answer everything, but before we close, can I just very briefly go round the panels, just for a sort of sentence on your reflections or any sort of thoughts in terms of how we might take this conversation forward. Kate, can I start with you?
I think there's something important about creating the space and the conditions to enable communities to share their needs and their experience, to recognise not only the inequalities that can exist in our society, but the inequalities that can sit in the room when we're trying to talk about what are the needs and what are the solutions to those needs. So really think carefully about the space and the conditions to enable people to contribute to crafting those solutions.
Thank you. And Vanessa?
I would say that with universities, it's not a competition. It's what we look at in our place. I think there's some fantastic examples within the chat. There's some fantastic examples we've all spoke about. I'm immensely proud of what my university is doing, but I don't think everyone has to do the same. I think you have to respond to your local economic needs and your own priorities as an institution. And I think the role of the civic is to actually have a really good level playing field to say, this is what all of us are doing. And it's not that one is better than the other, and one's got more research funding than another, or one has done this. I'm equally proud of what we did 5 years ago, what we are now. We've been on a journey. We've been on a really long and difficult journey, like most universities working place. We've gone through different models. We've tried, and I think what universities have the ability to do, which local authorities don't have, we can take a bit of risk. We still can take risk and take a bit of a gamble and go, well, let's try this, and not have to go through all the kind of pressures that a local authority, even the Arts Council have. We can suddenly think about, you know, one of our academics is great, let them just try it. And they might be a basket case, sometimes they are, but obviously sometimes they come out with amazing stuff that transforms the place. And it doesn't have to be about huge grants or huge research projects, it can just be about connections. And I think that's important. Let's not say my daughter's prettier than yours. Let's say all of us are equally important in this space.
That's a good point. And Hugh, do you want to add anything?
I mean, I would certainly agree with Vanessa's point about the ability of universities to take risk over and above what councils can do, and the scrutiny that would be on us. You know, despite the last 15 months, I think there's a real opportunity now to reinforce the central role of creativity and culture within our places. And I think, you know, the partnership between universities and councils will be critical in making that a reality in so many areas. So, you know, I'd leave on that hopeful point, I think, and just to say, if anybody wants to read the Cultural Cities Inquiry, I think we've shared some with the Civic Network, and it's also online on the Core Cities website, I think, as well. So do have a read if you're interested. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hugh. And finally, Darren.
Three very quick things from me. I think data driving evidence for the value of what we do is really important, and you are great custodians of that. Collaboration and co-curation from within each place is really, really important. And finally, we do have this opportunity right now for a future that's based on more fairness and more opportunity, and I think we should seize that.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. I think we've had some fascinating insights and some great questions from our audience. Really appreciate your time. I think if I could just close the session by thanking everyone. I hope you have found it interesting and useful. There'll be a poll on your screens in a moment, so if you can tick one of those to give us some feedback. Please do engage on Twitter, and if you want to continue the discussion, we have our conference discussion board, the place space, where you can engage, and do sign up to our members area, which is free, and the network newsletter. So just to close the session, thanks again to everyone. There's obviously a lot of opportunity for us to work collaboratively and to create the conditions in our places, and to take some risks, and to be inclusive, and not to feel in competition. But thank you very much. It's been a great session, really enjoyed it.